So the divisional round of the NFL playoffs is officially in the books. We know the official order for the first 28 picks of the 2016 NFL draft. So I'm here today to give you an updated 2016 NFL mock draft. This is a two-round edition as promised. All 63 picks from the two rounds will be found in the description box down below. And come next week, we'll know the first 30 picks of the order, and we'll know who will be ultimately representing the AFC and the NFC in Super Bowl 50. When you look at my two-round mock draft, a couple of things probably stand out. Some notable or noteworthy picks in the first round, some noteworthy players that ended up dropping to round 2 or being taken in round 2 and where they ended up being taken at. And then some of the bigger names that you may be familiar with that are outside of the first two rounds and why I've put them there, and whether or not they should expect to stay there. Now, in terms of the first-round picks, the ones that probably stand out to you the most are some of the ones that are different than what I've done before. You know, some of the other ones, like I've had DeForest Buckner number 3 to San Diego before. I've had Joey Bosa going to Baltimore before. Doesn't mean I've done it every time, but I've done it before, meaning that it's not that much outside of the realm of what I've been doing, you know. So I'm talking about the things that would be big changes that represent a shift in philosophy. So let's start off with the 4th overall pick, the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys coaching staff is going to be at the Senior Bowl, which to me gives them a perfect opportunity to get to know Carson Wentz better, the quarterback from North Dakota State, to get more familiar with them, because beyond question, beyond a shadow of a doubt in anybody's mind, the number one need for the Dallas Cowboys organization is to find a young backup quarterback that could step in if Romo's hurt and then eventually take over. That's the number one need, the number one priority, in my opinion, this offseason for the Cowboys organization. So now you get a chance to look up close and personal for an entire week at arguably the hottest of the quarterback prospects in this draft class, a guy that's going to have a lot of buzz, and I assure you a guy that is going to be ranked number 1 on the quarterback rankings in a lot of war rooms come draft time. I promise you and I assure you of that. So now you look, you're the Dallas Cowboys with the 4th overall pick. Yes, you could sit there and take Joey Bosa and it would make sense. Yes, you could take Myles Jack and it most certainly would make sense. You could take a wide receiver there if you felt it was right, and maybe it makes sense there, maybe it doesn't. But you could take Ezekiel Elliott there at number 4, and that surely would make some sense as well. But to me, there's not, with the way this board breaks down and the situation the Cowboys find themselves in, you know, they could be looking at it as a situation of they're going to think they make the playoffs next year, but going forward, they'll be in a position where they're at least mediocre. This might be the best chance they have to grab a marquee quarterback prospect for years to come. And do they really want to potentially let that opportunity slip by the wayside? And I don't know that they do. For me, Carson Wentz is the number 1 quarterback on the board in the 2016 NFL draft. I'm most certainly not going to knock the Dallas Cowboys if they end up drafting him here. And part of this, I just did it as a scenario to see what would happen if Goff goes 2 to the Browns, which I would expect at least at this moment, and then Carson Wentz goes number 4 to Dallas. How does this jack up the draft? What else kind of falls into place? And that's part of the reason I do this. Now, number 7, you know, you'll probably see some mock drafts that'll have Ronnie Stanley go there, and that would certainly make some sense. You'll see some drafts that'll have Laquon Treadwell, Megaquan, if you will, from Ole Miss going there at number 7, because the 49ers, as much as they need a quarterback, and that's true, you could argue wide receiver is just as big of a need, because Anquan Bolden is old and close to done, and Torrey Smith is basically very little to almost none at the position on a consistent basis. They're just about as bad at wide receiver as they are at quarterback. But to me, I look at this wide receiver class, and I see Corey Coleman above a guy like a Laquon Treadwell. To me, a Corey Coleman, with his ability to create yardage after the catch, with his ability to get initial separation and real separation against all different types of defensive backs and defensive systems, and his explosiveness, his true home run threat ability, to me at the end of the day just makes him a more enticing wide receiver prospect for that top 10 as opposed to a guy like a Laquon Treadwell who might be a so-so number 1 or a really, really good number 2 wide receiver at the NFL level. To me, you shouldn't be taking really, really good number 2 wide receivers in the top 10 of any draft unless a draft is just that really, really weak. And I don't mean that as an insult to Laquon Treadwell, but I think the 49ers here, just in part, like I said, playing out a scenario, Corey Coleman, number 7 from Baylor, makes a lot of sense because he's the best home run threat arguably in this entire draft on the offensive side of the ball. Wide receiver, running back position does not matter. Now you'll look at the Bears at number 11. I think Jaylon Smith being there would present a really interesting situation. It could be argued at that particular moment in time that he would be the best player available on the board. And if he hadn't torn up his knee in the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State, he probably wouldn't be there. But now you're sitting there and you're the Bears at number 11. You have a huge need at inside linebacker. Arguably, outside of a young quarterback, it's the biggest need you have on your entire roster. And I don't dispute that. I most certainly agree with that. For an organization that so many years their success has been built off of the back of great inside linebacking play, now you're in a situation where it's the biggest weakness you have on your entire team. Jaylon Smith, number 11. Man, that's really tempting. Now, it would take some guts and some balls for Ryan Pace, the general manager, to ultimately pull the trigger on that pick. Now, regardless of how good of a fit he would be for John Fox and Vic Fangio in that defensive scheme, I think he'd be a magnificent fit. And he would be an impact, immediate defensive player once he got on the field and be a long-term building block on that defensive side of the ball. But it would be basically the Bears damn near taking a second consecutive first-round pick that ends up having a redshirt year. That would take some risk. It'd be the second straight year you had a first-round pick that missed at least a good portion of the season, or very possibly the entire season of their rookie year due to an injury, a leg injury at that. And in this case, a guy coming off of a torn ACL and MCL. But man, if you're the Bears and you look at the way this board kind of breaks down in terms of what makes sense for you, I would have absolutely no problem with them taking Jaylon Smith, number 11 overall. I really wouldn't, because at the end of the day, you're not trying to get somebody that's going to help you just in year one. You're trying to find somebody that could potentially be that dude for you for a decade. And when you're talking about defensive players in this draft, on that very, very short list of guys that could be that dude for you for a decade, Jaylon Smith is on that list. So what happens 2017 and beyond where Jaylon Smith becomes that big-time inside linebacker, the heart of your 3-4 defense? I mean, for the Bears, it'd be hard to pass up on that. 2 defensive backs that dropped outside of the top 20 in my mock that a lot of you will probably be scratching your heads about, and some of you will surely be saying the usual shit. You don't know what you're fucking talking about. These guys aren't dropping. Yet those of you that have followed me for years know I don't get everything right, but one of the things I tend to be right about more than I'm wrong about are guys dropping past a certain point. You even look at last year's draft. Randy Gregory's top 5, top 10 pick. I said he's a fucking second-round pick. Landon Collins, top 10 pick. Landon Collins, and by the end of the day, I'm like, he's going round number 2. Leonard Williams going to go second to Tennessee. I'm like, he's going to drop outside of the top 5. Every year we see this shit happen. And every year people come at me and say I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about. But the fact of the matter is, I think when you look at Jalen Ramsey, you're going to have certain front offices and scouting departments that are only going to look at his 2015 film and only try and envision him as a corner. And as a result, they're going to see a second-round prospect, not a first-round prospect. I promise you. Then you're going to have the other teams that will view him as a safety. But because he didn't play safety in 2015, they're going back to the 2014 film, and they might not be willing to pull the trigger on him in the top 10 or even the top 15 and probably even the top 20. But in this case, Jalen Ramsey going 21 to the Washington Redskins, you play him at corner, you play him at safety, it doesn't fucking matter. It's a huge upgrade. You get a difference maker in the back half of that defense, in that secondary. It'd be a wonderful pick for them, and Jalen Ramsey would be a good fit for them. And then Vernon Hargreaves going 25 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. This will probably be one that's even more of a surprise, because similarly to Jalen Ramsey, I look at their situations and I don't view them necessarily as top 5 or top 10 talents at this moment anyways. But I think that their range of drafting should potentially be maybe somewhere between number 10 to 20, somewhere in there, 10 to 20. Now there's a chance that one or both of them could still end up going somewhere between 6 to 10. I don't think that's incredibly likely, especially in the case of Hargreaves. Possibility. But I also think there's a possibility on the flip side that these guys could drop. And in the case of Hargreaves, it's going to be in part because of the lack of size. There is going to be some concerns based off of the film that teams saw of him at Florida in 2015. There were moments where I saw him and I saw a second round or even a third round corner. I did not see a big-time impact defensive back. I did not see a shutdown cover corner like he's been packaged by the draft media for a year plus and most of draft Twitter has. And I see a lot of these mock drafts that still have him going in the top 5 or top 8, and I think people are fucking crazy. And ultimately, come the end of April, we'll find out who's right or who's wrong and who's fucking crazy or not. But I'll bet on myself saying that these other people are fucking insane. Now, in terms of some notable picks, in terms of players that are there in round number 2, I look at a pair of Clemson players in Mackenzie Alexander and Shaq Lawson. Mackenzie Alexander, again, could be questions about his size, and I think some questions maybe about his athleticism. The first pick of round number 2 is not a terrible place to be for him. Then you look at Shaq Lawson from Clemson. As you notice, can see here in this mock draft, I've actually got his teammate Kevin Dodd going higher than him. That's not necessarily a reflection of how I feel it should be. It's more just a reflection of how sometimes the fucking draft process goes. As I've talked about in other mock draft videos that I've done, one thing that doesn't get accounted for nearly enough is the dipshit factor. And to me, Shaq Lawson made a guy like Kevin Dodd having a high draft stock even possible. As a result, teams are going to sit there and neglect that, and they're going to take a Kevin Dodd perhaps over a Shaq Lawson, even though with all the attention Shaq Lawson got on that defense, he still put up better defensive numbers, especially in terms of sacks. Not by a lot, mind you, but he did by some. But again, I've got Shaq Lawson going to Baltimore. I don't know that he's an incredibly twitchy, explosive athlete, which will cause him to drop on some teams' boards. And there are going to be quite a few teams, I think, that will view him as a 4-3 base left end and think that they can get that type of guy in the very, very late first or early portion of round number 2. I won't be surprised if he ends up getting drafted there at all. Doesn't mean that I agree with that. Doesn't mean that I buy that or think that's the way it should be. Again, this is in part projecting, and part of the projecting, again, is that kind of groupthink within the scouting community and, frankly, some of the dipshit factor, because a lot of these teams, frankly, aren't good at their fucking jobs. And when we do these mock drafts, we should stop assuming that every team knows what the hell they're doing, because a lot of them, frankly, do not, and their draft history bores that out. Now, I look at a couple of Alabama players. Jaylon Reed, the defensive lineman from Alabama. He's a guy that could end up going in the top 20 of this draft or top 25 of this draft, and that's very, very possible. But then, because of the depth of the defensive line position and maybe preferences and wanting players that are more explosive or bigger, a guy like Jaylon Reed could end up slipping through the cracks and ended up being a really good value in the middle of round number 2. And then you look at Derrick Henry, the running back from Alabama. I've got him going to the Jets in round number 2. I think it's a really good fit. He's like a Chris Ivory back, only he's bigger and better. At some point in time, this Jets team does need to invest some draft pick currency on the offensive side of the ball, and Derrick Henry would be a good place to do so. And that would be a solid pick right there in the middle portion of round 2, which is frankly where I think his draft stock is. And then you'll look at Christian Hackenberg. A lot of people will probably have him going to Houston in round number 2. Fuck, for all we know, Bill O'Brien could get such a hard-on for him. He might end up taking him in round number 1 when all is said and goddamn done. But in the meantime, I don't have that happening here. I've got Hackenberg going to the LA Rams in round number 2. They need a quarterback, and maybe they gamble on the upside of him. It'd be kind of a head-scratcher because just last year they spent a third-round pick on Sean Mannion to turn around and spend a second-round pick on Hackenberg this year. But frankly, for all the ass-kissing a lot of us, and sometimes even me, have done for the St. Louis Rams over the past several years, they haven't been that good. They haven't been that outstanding in the draft. So who's to say that they get this right either? In terms of some other notable names you'll see that aren't even on the board in the first 2 rounds, I look at quarterback Connor Cook. I've talked about that before. Questions about his accuracy, questions about his leadership, questions about his maturity, and if he loves the limelight too much and he doesn't work hard enough at the position, because there was a lack of growth and progression in his game in the past 3+ years. I'd be stunned if he goes in the first 2 rounds. And again, to me, it's another reflection of if he did go in the first 2 rounds of this draft, that means scouts and front office executives aren't very good at their job. Robert Nkemdiche, I've talked about this multiple times, and just a quick reminder, the guy has major off-the-field issues. Yes, he's a tremendous athlete, but there will be serious questions about what position would be best suited for at the NFL level, combined with the fact that he gets into the backfield a lot but doesn't finish plays very much, isn't much of a natural pass rusher. Why would you take a guy like that in the first 2 rounds? Just because the media's in love with him doesn't mean shit. Tyler Boyd, the wide receiver from Pittsburgh, there are things I like about his game, but I really seriously wonder about his ability to separate. I see sometimes a Jaylon Strong on film, and Jaylon Strong winning in the 3rd round. I think that might be the place that Tyler Boyd ends up going. Sean Oakman from Baylor, we all know him from that big internet meme where you're sitting there and looking like fucking Hulk a beast. But, a guy with skinny legs and is a major project, maybe somebody will gamble on him on round number 2. That's always a possibility because they'll look at that size, they'll look at that potential athletic upside. There's a lot of work there. I'd be stunned if he did go in the first 2 rounds of this draft. So again, those are just some of my thoughts. You can let me know your thoughts, comments, questions in the description box or comment section down below. Check out my picks again in the description box. I'll be back next week with another mock draft after the NFC and AFC championship games, and that one will be a 3-round edition. So in the meantime, check out some of my other 2015 T-by-Team video recaps of the season, and then also check out some of the scouting reports that I have up because I've got plenty more still to come.